Good evening, and welcome to Deep Space Wine, a Star Trek podcast featuring Kat and Tim.
Hello.
Good evening, Kat. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself, Tim?
I am doing okay. Thank you very much. We are doing okay. So, to introduce the plan, Kat is a newcomer to Deep Space Nine, and they are watching it for the first time. Conversely, I am a grizzled veteran who remembers Deep Space Nine being syndicated in the UK for the first time in about 1995. So between us, we hope to have a very engaging and interesting discussion about Star Trek between a newcomer and an old fan like myself. And hopefully we will find a very exciting amount of discussion in between. To bring us up to date, we are now at episode 4 of season 1, which is A Man Alone. For the benefit of our viewers, I would like to give you just an indication that there is a content warning. We will, of course, be discussing violent topics, including murder. I wanted to flag the body horror around the cloning element of this episode. And also, we will be touching on kind of racist tropes around the actions directed against Odo, with the mob that pursues him in one point. So just a kind of heads up that those things are going to be discussed in this episode, and we want everyone to be obviously very comfortable in this environment. I think that is all of the housekeeping we need to do.
Hi.
So I'm going to ask Kat if they could give me a plot summary so we can bring everyone up to speed.
Right. Exactly like I did with the first episode, I tried to do a nice, concise plot summary and then discovered that unless you include every single detail of what happens in the episode, so much gets lost. So if you find that I've gone over, 15, 20 minutes, cut me short and just say, and then everything was okay, and we'll go from there. Right. Pre-credit sequence. Jadzia Dax, who for newcomers is a symbiote formed from the very old Trill known as Dax, who survives by living in a host body, Jadzia, is trying to enjoy some alone time solving a puzzle in the holodeck when Dr. Julian Bashir barges in.
No, bashes in, it works.
You can't bash the doors in, they slide sideways. To flirt enthusiastically but clumsily with Jadzia, he asks her to supper just as Ben Sisko, the station commander, turns up to take her to dinner. Oh, sorry, Julian. Quark, the owner of the ship's bar and casino, and Odo, the station's security officer, who is a shapeshifter, are in Quark's bar, chatting about how busy with visitors the station is becoming now that the nearby wormhole has been discovered. Miles O'Brien, chief engineer, and his wife Keiko are, surprise, surprise, arguing in the background. Odo then spots a Bajoran man, Ibodan, who he recognizes and is visibly upset to see. Dax and Sisko are sitting on the mezzanine level of the promenade discussing food. Sisko describing his dad's making food for the family when he was young, and Dax insisting that steamed asna is the healthiest food you could eat, and Sisko could lengthen his life by switching to it. Sisko replies he would rather not have extra years added to his life if having them meant only eating steamed asna. Sisko tells Dax that he thinks of her as a mentor and another father to him. He previously knew her in an old body when she was male. And he says that it's a little uncomfortable now that Dax is in a new body. Dax suggests that Sisko allow himself to become uncomfortable with his discomfort. Odo approaches Ibodan, the man he was angry to see in the bar, and tells him that he wants him off the station. They fight, and Sisko comes in between them. Odo warns Ibodan that he has 26 hours to get off the station. Meanwhile, Keiko tells Miles that she's frustrated with being on DS9. She feels lost as a botanist on a space station without the need for botany. All she wants is to feel useful. Odo explains to Sisko that Ibodan used to run black market goods, including medical supplies, during the Cardassian occupation. Ibodan had allowed people to die when they couldn't afford their medication, and he was imprisoned after killing a Cardassian officer who refused a bribe, and Odo was the one who arrested him. Ibodan was released by the Provisional Bajoran government. Sisko says that Odo cannot make Ibodan leave the station unless he's done something wrong now, that Odo can't take the law into his own hands. Odo argues that laws change depending on who's making them. Cardassians one day, Bajorans the next. But justice is justice, and as long as I'm in charge of security, and Sisko cuts him off and advises Odo that if he can't work within the rules, Sisko will find someone who can. We cut to Ibodan, lying on his front, smiling while receiving a massage in the holodeck. when a figure dressed in black whose face is not shown pushes the hologram masseurs away and stabs Ibudan in the back with a very large knife, killing him. Jake, who is Cisco's son, and Nog, who is Quark's nephew, are making trouble. Nog has some fast-moving insects, Garanian bolites, in a small box and is clearly intending to use them for mischief. Bashir asks Dax about her dinner with Cisco. She looks weary and tells him that Trills do not look for romance the way that humans do, and in fact they find it quite a nuisance, considering it a weakness of the young. Older Trill aim to live on a higher plane and to rise above these temptations. Julian leaps on the word try, suggesting that Dax might not always succeed in resisting temptation, and he's still got a bottle of champagne on ice, but he's called away by the commander. Nog releases the little box of insects, the Garanian bolites, over an unsuspecting couple eating on the promenade. The couple suddenly start scratching, then leap up, their skin changing wildly to blue and orange and green, and then they start shouting for help until just as quickly the symptoms stop. They look embarrassed and relieved and they sit back down. Keiko O'Brien looks on as a member of security spots Nog and Jake giggling a few feet away, and the security person leads them away by their collars. Odo, Major Kira Nerys, who is the Bajoran liaison officer aboard Deep Space Nine and a close friend of Odo, and Dr. Bashir are investigating the murder of Ibudan in the holodeck. Bashir says he will sweep the scene for DNA traces from the killer. Keiko tells Miles about Jake and Nog on the promenade. She says there are too many ways for kids to get in serious trouble on the space station, and what the station needs is a school. A Bajoran friend of Ibudan comes to Cisco, telling him that Ibudan told him 1 hour before he was murdered that he was afraid Odo would kill him. Kira argues that Odo would never do such a thing. Nonetheless, Odo is now a suspect in Ibudan's murder. Odo looks at entries made on the computer terminal in Ibudan's quarters in the days up to his death. There's an entry in his calendar labelled just Odo, at the time when the murder took place. Not looking good for Odo. Keiko, Cisco, and Jake are having a conversation about Jake's getting up to no good with Nog. Keiko says that there are many kids aboard the station, but no structured activity for them, and that while she's never been a teacher, she's thought about it. Cisco thinks it's a great idea and will provide her with the resources she needs, but she'll need to persuade the parents to send their children to the school. Meanwhile, while investigating Ibudan's murder, there's so much going on here. We're starting a school. There are kids throwing insects at people. There's been a murder. While investigating Ibudan's murder, Odo admits that the only kind of person who could enter the holosuite during the time when Ibudan was murdered and the door was sealed would be a shapeshifter. This, along with the meeting with Odo in Ibudan's calendar and Odo's DNA, which Bashir has since found at the crime scene, are highly incriminating. Odo tells Kira that he doesn't have an alibi. When Ibudan was being killed, Odo was resting in liquid form in a bucket in the back of his office, which he needs to do every few hours so that he can continue to maintain his humanoid state around everyone else. Kira suggests that the murder was planned down to that level of detail, the time he would be in his bucket, to incriminate Odo. Odo can think of about 500 people who might want to frame him for murder, but none of whom he's seen aboard the station lately. He asks Kira if Bashir can check the second bed in Ibudan's quarters for DNA to find out if anyone else had been using it. Kira agrees to send Bashir there immediately. We're probably about halfway through the summary. Keiko tries to persuade Rom, Quark's brother, to send his son Nog to her school. 3 Bajoran men are drinking in Quark's bar, discussing Odo's still being security chief while a suspect for murder. Quark leans in to tell them that while Odo is ill-tempered and overbearing, he isn't a Cardassian collaborator and he is no killer. Bashir tells Odo that he's found evidence that Ibudan had a biological sample container in his room. Although he wasn't a doctor or a scientist, Ibudan seems to have been conducting some kind of experiment. So Bashir takes DNA fragments that he's found in the container and puts them in a regenerative field to find out what the DNA grows into. In a short while, they'll know what Ibudan was working on. While not himself believing that Odo is guilty, Cisco temporarily relieves him of his duties as he agrees that the aggrieved Bajorans do have a point, that Odo's investigating the murder represents a conflict of interests. Just a little bit. Kira and Dax will be in charge of the investigations, despite Kira being Odo's friend and with a vested interest in proving him innocent. That's just never brought up. She's in charge now. Odo returns to his office to find screens smashed up, furniture overturned, and the word shifter scrawled over a wall. Quark helpfully turns up to tell Odo that his absence is a great opportunity for Quark to return to his usual tricks. They both agree that by keeping Quark on his toes for so long, Odo has turned him into a better crook. Quark grinningly hands Odo a list of the people who Ibudan spent time with in prison. Sisko and Bashir discuss Dax. Sisko reassures the Doctor that he and Dax are just friends, and that if Bashir is interested in Dax, he has nothing to fear from Sisko. Really high stakes here. Is Julian going to get his end away while the murder's being solved? Odo enters the bar and many patrons leave, commenting, "I won't drink near this scum," and shapeshifter. Keiko sets up her schoolroom and comments to Miles that she isn't sure anyone but Jake will be coming. Miles gives her a gift, an old-fashioned handheld school bell. There's a kerfuffle outside. Keiko goes back to the safety of their quarters, and Miles leaves to deal with it. Odo retreats to his office as a mob has formed and is loudly pursuing him. O'Brien calls Sisko to the scene, and security officers stand in front of the door of Odo's office to protect Odo. Someone throws a hard object at the office door. The glass cracks. An elderly Bajoran man in a hood looks on from a distance. The crowd start chanting, "Shifter." When Sisko asks what they'll do if they get into Odo's office, a Bajoran man laughs cruelly before asking the crowd how they will get a rope around the neck of a shapeshifter. After some infighting in the crowd, Odo steps out of his office. Sisko gives a stirring speech, advising the mob that they will regret their actions an hour from now, and not to condemn Odo because he's different from them. That justice must be served in a court of law and not by mob violence. Bashir then arrives just at the right moment to announce that the murdered man was not, in fact, Ibudan, but a clone, which Ibudan created and then murdered himself. A clone which Bashir has now successfully recreated in his lab from cloned DNA samples he found in Ibudan's room. This means that the real Ibudan is still alive, and Odo says he knows where to find him. Cut to an empty quarters on a spaceship, which is entered by the hooded Bajoran man who was watching the mob earlier. As he takes off his hood, the chair in the background suddenly morphs into Odo, who is waiting for him. It's a lovely moment. The de-hooded man asks who Odo is. "Who are you? What are you doing in my room?" And with 2 minutes of the episode to go, Odo quickly tells the man that Odo believes that the man has spent the last few years in prison with Bajoran dissidents, including a scientist who was arrested by the Cardassians for conducting experimental research into triphasic cloning. The man tries to escape, and Odo grabs him, pulls off his amazingly realistic old man mask. I know, right? It's almost like he was a different person, revealing that the hooded man was Ibudan all along. Odo advises him that killing your own clone is still murder and arrests him. Yeah. Sisko makes a log entry saying that Ibudan has been turned over to the Bajoran authorities just hours after his new clone regained consciousness and began a new life. The perpetrators of the mob violence have retreated into their own business. Wow. No consequences for them. No. And to his knowledge, Odo has received no apologies. In the last scene of the show, Keiko is pacing in her empty classroom at 09:07 hours. Suddenly, Sisko turns up with Jake, followed by Rom and Nog. Rom says that they'll try school for a few weeks, and both parents leave as 2 more children arrive. Sisko smiles as he hears Keiko start her first lesson. Cut to station exterior, episode ends. But a lot goes on.
Oh my God. That was incredible, Kat. Congratulations. To remind all of the new people joining us, Kat has never seen DS9 before, so their summary is commendable. Well done. Because yes, an incredible amount happens in this episode. I do feel that the A and B plots, how a lot of Star Trek shows run, are quite, the B plot, the school, is a lot quieter, but it's still quite intense and complex. So I think you've done a commendable job covering both.
Thank you. I noted we've kind of got A, B, and C plots in this one. You've also got Julian trying to date Jadzia, which is carried on throughout, and you learn about all the different characters, their relationships, something of each of their histories. They just cram so much into 45 minutes, and nuts and bolts wise, it's very elegantly done. The characters will cross in corridors, and that carries you into the next storyline, and you're not left at the end thinking, what the heck just happened?
You're absolutely right. I love that, actually, that it's not like on the Enterprise D where everything always goes back to the bridge or Picard's ready room to have like a conversation. People are walking around this living, breathing space station, bumping into one another and having conversations that progress the plot in a very organic and natural way, I feel.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And as you noticed last time, they use lots of different camera angles on the station. They've got different levels. There's lots of looking up to see who's watching the scene going on. And it feels, yes, you're right. It feels more organic and more real. It feels like a place where things are really happening rather than a ship in which things are staged to happen at nicely timed intervals.
Which is no criticism of TNG. It was and is an excellent show and probably one of the best installments in the broad Star Trek
I do
franchise,
bloody
but
love TNG.
it is incredibly well staged, whereas DS9 feels a lot more organic, I feel. Thank you to the Indoor Cat for noting the interaction between Odo and Quark in this episode is very good. We will get onto that because it is indeed the beginning of a very rich and complex relationship in all Star Trek. But our approach to this episode is now that Cat has done a fantastic summary. I will run roughshod all over that, take us right back to the beginning, and just work through it as both they and we have made, and I have made our notes, on each scene. And that cold open returns us to Bashir still attempting to court Dax, and I found Dax was very deft at dealing with, and forgive me here, I've written fuckboys, because Bashir just seems like, the kind of guy to send you a subspace message saying, you up? And I just, my skin crawled at how...
Oh, bless you.
I mean, what was your impression there? Because I thought she was excellent at dealing with him.
She really is, and I think informed by having later seen the scene with Sisko, where Sisko is describing to Bashir the times that he used to spend with Jadzia when she was, what was her old name prior to being Jadzia? Curzon Dax. Yeah. When he was Curzon, they went on, I think they went on a holiday together and met these two twins that Curzon knew. And then I guess we won't be doing that again anytime soon. But you do get an impression as Jadzia is played, she is older. She's much older than Julian, who's in his late 20s, early 30s, I think. And she's much calmer. She's very staid and steady. Effectively, Julian is trying to seduce... Oh, God, he's got Garrett going on the one hand, and then this very old man now in the body of a young woman on the other hand. And he's got very strong, excited puppy energy. He just wants to be around her, and he's excited. And I think I don't encounter him as predatory just because she's so clearly in control of it. Similarly with Garrett, he is so clearly in control of this. She is in control of the situation, such that she doesn't feel predated on by him. She said they find it a nuisance.
Yes.
That older Trill tend to find romance a nuisance, and I think she is... not so gently trying to tell Julian that that's exactly what he is in that moment.
Yes, I don't get any. Whilst referring to Bashir as a fuckboy, he's by nowhere near as toxic, venomous, or predatory, I think, as they are in our world. This is still Star Trek at its heart, and you're right. It's puppyish enthusiasm and infatuation with Terry Farrell, who is a very attractive actress and a very compelling and cool character as Dax, definitely. But yes, I don't get that there's a malicious angle to it. That would be, I think, taking it a bit too far.
I think so, and I also enjoy the way that Julian talks about Dax with Bashir. Julian does have a motive. He wants to know what Dax is like with an aim to seducing her.
Of course he does.
But when Sisko has talked about his old times with Curzon many years ago, Bashir gives a response. I haven't written down exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, if I'd known Dax as long as you had and knew everything about the life that she lived previously, I think I would be extremely interested in her. And I felt that was just, it's very sweet. I think the episode doesn't, there are lots of differences between Jadzia Dax and a trans woman. We've got this character who used to live full-time as a man, identified as a man, now switches immediately to identifying as a woman, using she, her pronouns, and being interested in men, possibly. Yes. I think they do retain that idea that if male, we'll be interested in females. If female, we'll be interested in pursuing men. But it's nicely done. The way that the other characters talk around her and about her, they respect her in the gender that she is in. There is never any question of, although I've said that she's acting as a person who has been an old man previously, Bashir doesn't see her that way, even when Sisko has described her previous life as such. When Quark is leering over her in an early scene, which is unpleasant, but it's what the Ferengi do in
which is exactly, it's a cultural thing. That is a very cultural, and we will get into this more. This cultural attitude of the Ferengi towards women is very, we would, it's classically problematic, but it's couched in that it is a Ferengi cultural thing, and as we know, Starfleet and the Federation respect cultures even when they don't respect us. But you do advance an excellent point, and it will be interesting to get your opinion on how their relationship develops. Dax and Quark develop a very unique relationship.
Yes, I would like to see more of that, because there's a moment in this episode when Quark is describing Dax to Odo and
Mm.
saying when she was a he,
Mm.
but he's still leering at her. He sees her now as completely female and as someone that he wants to interact with more. So yeah, there is a lot of gender validation for Dax. They just don't broach the idea that people will disrespect her gender or disrespect her for being a Trill or for having had a different gender in the past. It's not great trans representation, but it's refreshing and it's non-triggering. It is nice.
I'm glad you think so. I'm glad you think so. Indoor Cat there in the chat mentioning Dax has a line about as a Trill we try to overcome these human relationship type things.
Yes.
Now, for context, this is what we call on TV tropes early installment weirdness, because Dax will not always hew to this line. But right now, yeah, it's interesting to think actually Dax looks like a human, but being so old and having had previous genders. Cisco says he thinks Dax has had 6 lives previously. I think technically, no, that's right at this point in time. So I think they're trying to set up that Dax is, yes, perhaps above this kind of relationship thing, but as you correctly observe, not completely averse. Not completely suppressing those desires to be in a relationship, and that will change as the show develops. But in this installment, it is, I don't know, it's kind of strange that attempt to portray. I'm not actually 100% sure where I'm going because I keep wanting to refer to things that are coming up, and we treat each episode
certainly
as it comes to you as new. So no, I will leave that there. But now that we're at this, I do want to jump us ahead then to Dax and Cisco's conversation as a meal, and I think you have obviously a unique perspective as this on this. But when Jadzia advises Cisco to be comfortable with his discomfort and time can do the rest, I thought for the benefit of people like myself who are, coming to terms with redefining gender and wanting to respect my friends, discomfort I found a little bit of a heavy term. I wouldn't say discomfort. My entire, and this is going to be very personal, but my entire concern is that I don't want to offend my friends, even though I am trying to overcome some deep, inlaid, binaries. So I wanted to get your perspective on be comfortable with your discomfort. Felt like a bit of a pass, and I was curious what you thought.
I see what you mean, and I think I think at that point it isn't 100% clear exactly what the discomfort is. Cisco says it's uncomfortable now that you're in your new body, but he hasn't defined because you're female, because you're young, because I fancy you, because he hasn't said exactly why that is.
Yeah.
He's mentioned that Dax was previously a father figure to him. So maybe it's something around that and how he now has to reconstrue her as looking like a much younger person and younger than him,
Yes.
when previously he was someone older. And she still has all of those memories and all of that personality. So I think I understood that comment in those terms.
Excellent. Okay.
In terms of, yeah, it is still about gender and about her appearance changing, but it's about that big shift from an old man who had a familiar face to a young person who looks completely new but somehow remembers everything they've been through before. But yeah, I think in terms of, I'm not sure I'm qualified to go into people coming to terms with their discomfort around gender stuff. I think I think it's not bad advice, because I think a lot of people do experience discomfort around it, but it's worth interrogating what the source of that discomfort is for each individual. And I think they're like you for a lot of good people in the world. It's a fear of offending, and a fear of saying the wrong thing.
I can't speak for everyone, but definitely that is the root of my concern. Is just that, my friends, I respect my friends. However they wish to identify, I want to honour that. I'm just, my struggle is overcoming a lot of socially installed kind of conventions and binaries. So I like to think that is the same place that Cisco's coming from. Excuse me. You can imagine for 1993, that this is pretty revolutionary stuff,
It really is, and I would have expected some transphobia to have come through in these storylines, not necessarily intentionally either, but I would have expected characters to deliberately in the scripts trip over her pronouns, to refer to her wrongly, and they just don't. They refer to her as who she is now, and it's done really nicely. So far, at least, and I hope it will continue to be.
From my own rough recall, because I'm revisiting DS9 after quite a while of having watched it, I believe it stays pretty good. And there is definitely upcoming one scene when Jazia meets someone who knew their previous host, and there was just this wonderful moment. Curzon, my old friend. Oh, I'm Jadzia now. Jadzia, my old friend. And everyone's seen that meme, and it is held up constantly as a banner. And I'm glad because it's contained within itself. It's such a wonderful, brief, positive message. And I'm so proud that DS9 did it back in, God, that episode will be from about 1995, maybe? Something like that. So I'd like to think, on balance, you will find DS9 is fairly respectful of that very emerging discourse. And yeah, fingers crossed it absolutely sticks that way. Let me push us further on. Yes, there is that conversation in Quarks. There are lots of different conversations going on, and obviously we overhear the O'Briens having their argument, which I must admit, it's also nice to see Keiko brought over from TNG, where she was a supporting character.
Could I just walk us back to a moment to that conversation that Noelle, that our kind administrator. Yes. I'm stumbling over my words now. Right.
All right. Yes.
Somebody in the chat mentioned Odo and Quark's conversation and that developing relationship between Odo, or the understood relationship that exists between Odo and Quark.
Yeah.
And early in the episode, I can't remember the exact content of that conversation, but they're talking about their lives, and it's clear that there's enmity between them. Odo is there to keep Quark in check.
Yes.
Quark is there to push against the boundaries and see what he can get away with. And they shape each other and they interact with each other closely.
100%.
And later in the episode, when the Bajorans are talking about Odo and Quark intervenes, they say, but you're his worst enemy. Why are you defending him? And Odo says that might be the closest thing that he has to a friend. And it's a wonderfully telling moment about that character. It's just a lovely quote. And I think the trope of lovers to enemies is quite a common one. I don't think that's where this is going to go. Interesting though that would be.
Listen,
but yeah, the idea that this very isolated figure, the person that he's closest to, is the person he's most in contact with, the person he's most aggravated by. It's very much a Rimmer and Lister situation.
I think this is a testament to Kat's incredibly unique perspective on the show that they've never seen before. I could point you to acres of fan fiction that will take you in a whole different direction. But it's also safe to say that this is the beginning of a story that Odo and Quark will have through the next 7 years. They will constantly get to grips with this very unconventional relationship. And I think, for me, it's one of the most formative in fiction, this enemies to something else relationship. The journey you are embarking on with these two characters alone is just going to be incredible. But yes, Indoccat there. Odo and Quark are a bit comedic, but also legendary. Yes, couldn't sum it up better. That is all to come. I do want to immediately counter that, I'm afraid, and come back to this conversation that Odo and Quark are having in the intro, where Odo is talking about compromises, and I've got to admit, he comes across as the worst type of what we would now refer to as a boomer.
I wrote boomerish in my notes.
There we go. What a wonderful
It is very much, because his whole rant is, you want to watch a sports game, but she wants to listen to music, so you compromise and go to a concert. You want to listen to this music, she wants to listen to Klingon opera, so you listen to Klingon opera, and then suddenly, instead of a nice evening in watching your favorite sport, you're listening to horrible Klingon opera. It's like, oh my God, dude, seriously? Whose relationship have you been watching? What relationships have you been in? What have you done to yourself?
This is it, and we will find out. But yes, I do feel like, again, this might be what we call early installment weirdness again, but this portrayal of Odo as this kind of very inflexible, somewhat two-dimensional character. I wonder if that's like the canvas. You know, we start off and we think, oh wow, Odo's such this reactionary, old, stuck in the mud. And we're going to build on this. We're going to show you actually that he can change and he can become more than this. But that's interesting.
A shapeshifter who has to learn to change on the inside.
Oh, no. You've made it sound so simplistic. But yes, 100%. 100%. That is absolutely what it is. Um, yes,
But
yeah,
yes, his characterization is very strongly. He seems stubborn and grumpy, and he wants things to stay the same. He was irked in the last episode when he had to suddenly enact a
yes,
new set of laws. It was simpler before.
yes.
And yeah, he's not a people person. He wants to do his own thing, and he's just annoyed by the world. Is
He
this way he comes across here?
absolutely is. And I think that wonderfully segues us into that conversation you mentioned in the summary, his conversation with Cisco in the office about laws change. People may make laws change, but justice is justice. And it comes across a bit vigilante, which I think
Yeah.
doesn't stand him in good stead for the rest of the episode. It sounds like, and Cisco specifically says, I hope you're not going to take the law into your own hands. It's a lot of foreshadowing. And I
Yes.
found it very very concerning that we have this character that is justice, and I'm like, well, that's a very slippery concept. And
Yeah.
we have the Kardashians who represent a very tyrannical form of order, and then we have the Federation who represent a very lawful, let's say lawful good. If we use the old D&D alignment, they are lawful, but they are still order. So we have order and order, and then we have Odo in the middle, very free agent, and I don't know. Because you said earlier about we represent Odo as this this authority figure, but does he seem like an authority figure in that scene where Cisco was like, you can't, you've got to follow the laws?
Yeah, you're right. I think as I think about it, it feels a little ill-defined. He doesn't have any obvious loyalties. He will enact the law of whoever is currently in charge. He'll grumble while he's doing it.
Oh yeah.
I think I didn't get a sense of threat from him because he doesn't seem to have a strong agenda of his own. He isn't coming in and saying, this is the way I want it to be. He's just saying, no, I'm just going to make sure that everyone does things right. But it's not entirely clear what that rightness looks like just yet, I think. It might currently still look like Cardassian law just because that's what he's used to.
Mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely right. The worry is obviously that Kardashian law, is well, we will find out as the show develops. But Kardashian law, obviously, you can imagine a tyrannical government, very, very unforgiving. There is a reason that Odo was appointed security officer, keeper of law on a Cardassian station. Why not a Cardassian officer? We shall find out in time.
Ooh.
But I do feel like that conversation was supposed to prep us a bit, that Odo might go a bit off the rails, and perhaps he did actually step outside the law and enact a little bit of his own justice.
Yes, because he said he'll make sure justice is done no matter what, and suddenly a man turns up dead.
Right.
A man Odo dislikes. Yep.
Exactly. So I think that is that was meant to be, foreshadowing that.
And it also kind of highlights the difference between Odo and Cisco in that Cisco is a diplomat at all times. He is very calm and collected and says the right thing, and Odo just says exactly what he thinks. I think last time one of our kind ensigns said that Odo is just Odo. And it does seem to be that way.
He is. Well, you come out of the Next Generation where you feel that Worf is the Lancer for Picard. He is very much Picard's lieutenant. I'm out here to enforce the captain's law. With Odo, you get the complete opposite. He is positioning himself immediately as a free agent. I hold myself to justice, not Federation law, not Cardassian law, justice. I'm like, that's very interesting to have that immediate contrast between the head of the station, the captain of the ship, for TNG fans, and the Worf. He's not Worf. He's the opposite of a Worf.
Yeah,
really.
That's a good way of putting it.
I would like to move us on to the holosuite sequence with the Ibadan on the massage table and I've written in my notes, I've just written webbed massage and murder. The hands replaced by the glove, and it felt like such a kind of schlock horror.
It looks like something from Murder, She Wrote. It does feel like a murder's going to happen in this episode. We're going to make it look exciting, but also very quick and a bit silly.
Yes,
I mean,
the knife coming through the scene. I'm glad, obviously, they didn't show us anything, too violent beyond that. But I did find it.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, please.
And it happens in the holodeck. So I've got the extremely obvious complaint. There was a massive, the holodeck characters have to interact with whoever is using the holodeck. Why didn't they ask her what happened? Why didn't they reopen the program and find out from this AI what had actually gone on while the AI was in action? And secondly, the holodeck has been responsible for so many deaths by now. Why the hell are they still using it for leisure purposes? At no point do they name like, this happened in the holodeck. Do you think maybe we should close this? Maybe we should just not
let this happen. Yeah, I'm afraid if you pull on that thread, the entire fabric of Star Trek will unravel and the show will collapse around your ears, because having the holodeck as a place where anything can happen is the foundation of so many Star Trek stories I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, yeah, it was bad in TNG. It's bad in DS9. It'll get bad in Voyager. It'll get bad in every other installment. It's going to go wrong. I'm sorry. It's just a trope of its own now. But you raise a very good question, and other Star Trek episodes will deal with the autonomy of holodeck characters.
Oh, nice.
I've
seen a bit of that in TNG when Moriarty becomes self-aware due to a very unusual circumstance.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And I feel like there is a weird kind of anti-sapience push. It's like, oh, look, yes, the computer can synthesize that kind of sapience, but it means creating life. And Star Trek is always very cagey about what creating life looks like and the moral implications.
We'll come back to that when we get to Bashir creating a clone in this episode in a bit.
Right? Once again, Star Trek dancing around. What does that actually mean? You just created another life form. We'll just brush it under the carpet and never talk about it again. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Is that how you're going to approach this plot element?
At one point, Odo asks what's going to happen to the clone, and Bashir answers, in 2 days, he'll be up and about and a productive member of Bajoran society. And I'm like, what? Who's going to teach him language? Who's going to teach him how society works? How's this guy going to walk around with someone else's face? Who's now thought to have been murdered? How is any of this going to work? Why have you created life, Bashir? Why couldn't you just create a handful of cells and then do an analysis on it? What the heck? Oh my God.
We'll be right back after these messages, and it is never talked about again. Once again, science fiction gets away from the creators, I'm afraid. They don't...
They can deal with so many social issues with the episode, but if there's one that they just didn't have time for, they just kind of let it slide.
100%.
Cloning and the creation of life after a dead man. Oh.
Exactly.
Turns out not to be dead, of course, after a murderer now.
Oh, it's so bad. Indoor Cat, absolutely. Star Trek is not good with the whole clone situation. They never are. They never are. And I'm afraid that is just something we are absolutely going to have to deal with, unfortunately. I'm afraid it is my job always to be the bad guy and push us along, even though we could talk for longer. Bashir, yes, at this point in the episode, before he's called to the holodeck to investigate the murder, is persistent. I'll call it the persistence of the Bashir. He's still there with his champagne on ice, and Dax is trying to say, yes, we rise above. And I've said earlier that this is a topic they will come back to and develop more fully. And this storyline will be played out, but it jars on me that Bashir is still seen as this rather two-dimensional character. He's just interested in seducing Dax and will not take it. I feel Dax's polite discouragements, and I don't know.
It's true. He has lots of occasions when he might back down, respect what she's saying to him, and he just barges forward. Right. Yeah, I think again it doesn't feel predatory because he does seem like such a naive innocent, and he's kind of been presented in that way. Everything that he's done in the show so far has been, oh my goodness, we're here in the hinterlands. Oh, I get to be a spy. Oh my. Oh, Jadzia attractive. Oh, there's Garak over there. Wow. So he's got that kind of childlike innocence, but you shouldn't allow him to get away with it because of that. It is creepy what he's doing. Yeah.
The Indoor Cat is suggesting a platonic seduction. I like the idea that, but that feels just like, a complex kind of friendship, which I don't think at this point this show is doing. I think it's trying to say, haha, look at Bashir, he's this clueless, naive, ingenuine kind of character. And
I think though there is something about he wants her as a person, not just as a body.
I would agree.
In terms of how he's seducing, it's not just, hey babe, come back to mine for champagne, let's get naked. It is, I want to know about your lives. I want to know who you are. I'm fascinated by you. And there is something very pure about that, even if he is more persistent than he really should be.
I would absolutely agree with that, and I think a lot of that comes up in his conversation with Sisko, where obviously he learns more about Curzon, Jax's predecessor, and he's still just fascinated, you know. And after you know, Cisco's weirdly kind of bro-esque, me and Curzon and two 6 foot Rajalian twins, and so I
Yes.
find that a little bit uncomfortable. But you know, but she's just
That
like,
is a bit
wow.
weird. I'm like, how long before you met your wife, or after your wife died, or while you were with your wife and with Rajalian twins?
Wonderfully,
I don't think they timelined that.
they do later on. I'm happy to
Oh,
reassure
okay.
you, out of context, that yes, they do. They do clarify that this was very early in Ben's career as a little fledgling ensign, and Curzon as I think he was an ambassador at the time. So they built up very much this mentor relationship of an older man and a younger Korean ensign long before. I hope I'm right now saying this, but yes, I'm pretty sure it was prior to Jennifer's inclusion.
That does sound rather nice, and it does. Yeah, that is quite a nice, unusual idea to have his mentor, a much older person aboard the ship, in the guise of a much younger person now.
And I'm
Now
pleased
that
to
we've been
say that storyline continues, and they develop. I would say that Ben and Dax, I'm going to say Dax to encompass Curzon and Jadzia. I'm just going to say Dax. Their relationship is one of the strongest things in this show, I would say, and it is wonderful. And I'm going to let that develop and let you experience that, because I think it's one of the greatest things is the development of this very complex relationship that is not quite like anything else in the show.
I think that when it's this early on, and I am really excited to see how the relationships develop between the characters. They've done such a good job of introducing these very different people and how they interact with each other, how they know one another, or how they're getting to know each other. Yeah, it's very rich. There's so much there, even though it's early and there hasn't been time for character development yet. The characters are as they are.
They absolutely
But
are.
yeah.
And I love that they're cramming so much into the first handful of episodes in a way that I think other shows maybe struggle a bit with. They want to pay it out and be like, oh, this is long running and complex. And I'm like, that doesn't feel as organic. You're stretching this out to be a plot line. I think DS9 lets the plots, the action, the murder mystery occur, and then the character development happens in between. Like it would in the real world. You know, yes, there's been a murder and we need to prioritize that, but we'll grab some lunch and find out that, yeah, wow, my old friend Curzon is now my new young friend Jadzia, who's a beautiful young woman, as opposed to a, you know, older man who was apparently a bit of a carouser. You know, it feels more natural that it happens in the margins. But I think that's a DS9 trope. So there is the merry prankster scene, as I've written in my notes, where Nog and Jake, you know, I love that they try and get on, and you know, it's this, you know, there's not a lot of kids on the station, says Jake, and Nog's like, what do you want, human? Okay, my name's Nog, and then they become
I think
friends.
they first meet in a corridor and there's some antipathy between them. They don't want to talk to each other. Then they're both like, yeah, you're roughly my age. Yeah, why not? It's just box of bugs. Irritate some people.
Right. What a bizarrely comic scene. I love that.
And it's a lovely way to show those two characters bonding,
Right.
and it's harmless enough, and it just ties in neatly with Keiko's been having the conversation about how bored she is. The children have nothing to do. She used to be a teen. It's just but again, it's organic, but it's so very carefully structured within the script that each cue is in place before the event happens that comes after it. It's just very, very high quality script writing. When it didn't have to be, it could have been very schlocky and terrible, and people would still have watched it.
Of course they would.
Now we're taking care with it.
Of course they would, and that, thank you, segues nicely into the conversation Cisco then has in his quarters with Jake and Keiko when she comes to Cisco and says, look, you know, my idea, probably prompted by O'Brien, you know, when she said, you know, these kids need a school, and he was like, this could be a good idea. So he prompts Keiko to go to Cisco and talk about, you know, a school. And Cisco's, I find it a bit jarring initially when Cisco says, you know, my son will not have anything more to do with that Ferengi boy. I was a bit like, oh, that jars a little. That's a bit like, I'm not going to let you have contact with him because of his race. But then I realised that we're coming at this out of The Next Generation, when the Ferengi were touted as two-dimensional successors to the Klingons. They were meant to just be villains du jour.
Yeah.
So, and
Oh, I agree. It is unpleasant
little
that
jarring.
Cisco brings in the word Ferengi. He could have said, I don't want him interacting with that boy anymore. It didn't
This
need to be that
troublesome.
Ferengi.
It didn't. But then you've got to place it in this context of the episode and the universe, and tie in a bit maybe with O'Brien's experiences from the last episode when he was talking about you wouldn't want to turn a prisoner over to the Cardassians. You would say, oh, you can't justify a whole race like that, but this is Star Trek, and we've got these weirdly defined lines, I think, between these very different cultures. We can take from O'Brien's impression that the Cardassians are not pleasant to prisoners, and we know that's a fact. We can take from Sisko's impression that Ferengi are troublesome and nuisances at best, and threats to the Federation at worst. We've had Picard facing off in a combat situation against a Ferengi warship, so you can kind of see it. But again, I think that's where Star Trek falls into that habit of painting with broad lines these differing cultures.
And I think in this episode, in the conversation, which I don't think I included in my, very briefly in my summary, Keiko conversing with Rom about whether or not Nog will be allowed to come to the school.
Yeah.
And she very cleverly frames it in terms of, but he can learn things that you can't necessarily teach him. He can learn about the economic systems of different cultures. He can learn diplomacy, how to interact and persuade with the different people he's likely to meet. So she promises an education that will fit with her understanding of what a Ferengi needs. And it sounds very right. Rom agrees and is uncertain at first, but eventually does bring him to school because of it. But yeah, it does look, in that scene, certainly, the human is very cleverly drawing in the Ferengi to join in with something from their culture rather than the human is necessarily reaching out in an attempt to understand.
And I love that they give it to a supporting character, a guest star. That is the character between a guest star and at this point, an extra. There are no main cast members in that scene. It is Keiko and Rom having a conversation. It's wonderful. I can't think that TNG would so flagrantly give you a whole sequence.
You're right, actually. They give that to the ship's counselor. Whenever there's anything to do with anything emotional, difficult, or involving diplomacy, Troy ends up dealing with it because she is the woman. Other than Crusher, who is very straight, who is, I don't know, yes, not given so much feminine work to do apart from when she has to be the mother to Wesley, I think. Sorry, I won't go into the gender politics of TNG.
I would say that they were finding their feet in DS9, builds on that and just goes nuts, goes absolutely wild. And this is a great example of just saying Keiko is not a woman or a diplomat or anything like that. She's a school teacher. Rom is a parent. Those are those roles in that scene. There are no gender politics in it at all, apart from when Rom points out that my son will not listen to you. You are a female.
Yes,
which is a Ferengi cultural thing that we will come to grips with a lot over the time of DS9. But I think it's wonderfully played beyond those kind of very broad strokes. I think Star Trek's guilty.
Yes, because he names that, but he nonetheless listens to what she has to say and takes it on that basis. This does sound interesting. This does sound useful. This might keep my son out of trouble and stop me having to deal with him being dragged in by security every 10 minutes.
Which was obviously in the very first episode, poor not getting picked up by Odo. What a wonderful intro to them.
So, but yeah, it's in the. That's why I wanted to do such an in-depth summary, because it's in these small moments that the relationships are being built and the world is being built. It's 45 minutes jam-packed with stuff that's going to matter later.
Exactly. This is not part of the main plotline. This is the B plotline, which is the establishment of the school on DS9, and as you point out, the C plotline, the character development, which to me isn't even really a separate C plotline because it's happening all the way through. So it's not even like a structured plotline. It's just the bubbles around the drink that is this episode, which I found, we
need to put more drink metaphors and analogies into this,
This is wine. This is Deep Space Wine. This is Wine Trek, so we should be doing. But that to me is one of the strengths of DS9, which is why we are so glad to get Kat's viewpoint, because Kat has not seen DS9. They are only comparing it with TNG. So again, a wonderful reminder for those of us joining us new to the chat. Very small, interesting fact. Odo has to return to a liquid form and sleep in a pail, for us British speakers. Thank you, Kat, for noticing that in the summary. A bucket. every
He lives in
26 hours. And also a nice note that DS9 operates on a 26-hour day because it's an alien star
Yes,
system.
yeah, I didn't pick that out, but yes,
Such a tiny
26
but
hours.
wonderful little detail. 26-hour day. I love that. This as well for me is where DS9 shines. These little world building facts, they make no difference to our storyline, and yet there they are.
But yes, Odo being in liquid form when he's in his natural, relaxed state is just wonderful. There's something very Douglas Adams about that. It's something that, yeah, again, most shows of the time just wouldn't do. And he has to be anthropomorphic for most of the time, sadly.
Yeah.
I kind of wish that we got more dog Odo, and we've had rat Odo so far. Oh, they can make him any shape at all.
There is so much to come. I do feel that DS9 creators strove to do the best they could. Apparently, I've read behind the scenes notes that the morphing technology, the CGI for Odo's morphing, was very expensive and hard to do, and yet the episode pushes that framework so much. The show will push that framework so much. Indoor Cat points out the bucket situation, which is a brilliant name for a band. I would go and see the bucket situation.
Odo and the bucket situation.
Odo and the bucket situation. I would go and see that gig. It is such a thing, and it will become part of the show's long-running, complex character development, and I can't wait for us to get to that.
But on the note of Odo as a shapeshifter, I've got a bit of it's a lengthy and something that I spent a bit of time doing because it feels like quite a sensitive topic. So I'm going to dive into it and hope for the best. I'm just a content warning for anyone listening. I'm going to discuss the use of racism as a theme in this episode, and particularly the use of a lynch mob in the story. And why I think that the analogy isn't badly done, but I think the choice of Odo as a target of racism causes the message to fall a little short of what I think they wanted it to do. So when the episode starts, Odo is already a distrusted figure aboard the station, but for 4 different reasons. Firstly, he's a shapeshifter, which in this world is a race mysterious to everyone. Even for him, he's the only shapeshifter that even he knows of.
Excellent point.
2, people know that he has the power to take on any shape that he wants, and they are reasonably afraid of him because of that. Not only because he's different, but because it gives him an unusual amount of power that they don't have. He can listen to any conversation. He can look like anyone aboard the station. It's something that people are not accustomed to. 3, along with that, he's the chief of security. His role aboard the station is to keep the ordinary people in check. As part of his role, he has the ear of the commander. He is the arm of authority aboard the station, and he works for whoever is currently in charge, not on behalf of the ordinary workers of all races aboard the station. And related to that, he worked in the same position for the Cardassians before he worked for the Bajorans. The Cardassians are the enemy of the Bajorans. They're violent colonizers who stole their world, and Odo worked for them, upholding their laws, arresting people under those laws. So Odo is distrusted and othered from the majority of people aboard the ship, not only because of his race, but because of his superpowers, his job, his having worked for the Cardassians. And in this episode, the analogy of a racist lynching is very starkly drawn. Odo's office is the target of violence and racist graffiti. The only word they have for his race, shifter, is scrawled on a wall there. They make it very obviously about what he is. He's chased there by a shouting mob. A member of the mob refers to the crowds wanting to hang him. I think that the writers of the episode want it to be very, very clear, and they draw obvious parallels with the murders of black people in the United States at the hands of white racists. And Odo's being presumed guilty of a crime in this episode is all the excuse that that crowd needs to do what they've probably wanted to do for some time. And I think that for what it is, that's all done very well. The show makes it clear what the real world events are that it's alluding to, while it grounds the events very heavily in the story of what's happening on Deep Space Nine. It doesn't feel tacked on, it doesn't feel forced. The mob violence doesn't come out of nowhere, tension's carefully built, and the mob feels like a really horrible but realistic outcome of the developing situation. But I'm going to end my rant at some point. It's all right. But I think that the aspect of authority and who wields it is an important part of this story, and it gets heavily sidelined in the decision to make it mostly about racism. As a character, Odo isn't just a person who is suddenly being pursued because he's a shapeshifter. there's also a very strong element of the mighty brought low. He himself has wielded authority over these people for a long time, and now he is suddenly subject to the kind of criminal investigation that he previously undertook against others. The tables have turned. But I think that the writers wanted to make the main theme and the message of the episode much simpler, and they made the prejudice of the crowd solely about their racism against Odo. And when Cisco comes along, he talks about don't go after him because he is different. And I think that that's a very worthwhile message to communicate to an audience. The show successfully shows that racism is dangerous, that racist violence can flare up quickly, that people whose race is in the minority where they live are often in extreme danger. And I think that Odo's authoritative power and his being stripped of it are a big part of the story. And I don't think that his character is a great example of a person living in a racist state, because he's in a position of power over everyone around him. So yeah, I think some very good points in how it's done, but ultimately I think the message about racism is mixed with a muted message about the riskiness of wielding power as a person who is socially vulnerable. So it's more complicated than the episode's got time for, and I think Odo as the nominal man alone isn't quite as sympathetic as the message wants him to be.
I'm almost
sorry, that was a lot.
I think that is the kind of thing that I actually invite Kat in, because their opinions on things as a very intelligent and educated person
and as a white person, I've got my own views on racism borne out by just from what I read and what I see.
Of course it does. It comes
people around me, so I'm not an authority on it.
You have some expertise in this area that I don't have, and I'm grateful for that. And it comes with the proviso that yes, we're both Western white people at the end of the day, so we also, we have a lot of caveats that we can only give our own perspective as viewers on this, and we don't speak with any kind of authority on this. But
and we will have blind spots, and we will make mistakes and miss things 100%.
Sometimes. This will happen.
But I think that the trope of using aliens as an analogy for real world people who are in ethnic minorities where they live, it is a trope. But I think in Star Trek it's generally used with good intention, with the aim of raising stories which are relevant to the world in which we live, without being directly without being directly triggering to people who are living in them. It's meant to be redolent of our world without just directly replicating it and saying things haven't got any better.
There are so many temptations to spoil things for you that are coming up.
Sorry.
Not at all.
This is the trouble, because I haven't seen what comes next. I can't put this in the context of what the writers intend to do later.
You shouldn't. The way this podcast works in my eyes is that you watch it as a newcomer to DS9. And then when we hit episodes later on, which I feel are more adult and mature and deal with this in a much less aliens as other races, and are just straight up, how do we tackle the concept of racism in modern society? Because that comes up. Your impression of those informed by these episodes will be so much more interesting. So it's more my temptation to say we are going to touch on this in a much more serious way in about 5 years' time. But
we worked out that this podcast will last around 7 years if we do one episode every 2 weeks.
I hope you're sitting comfortably, dear viewer.
Strap in.
We may be here for some time. Yes, thank you, the Indoor Cat, once again, our regular companion and one of our backroom staff as well, pointing out very well that DS9 is going to come back to this topic time and again. These kind of complex cultural arguments are the bread and butter of DS9 in a way that...
But the Indoor Cat also points out that... the joy of the video call. I was going to say that the Indoor Cat has also said there's an interesting parallel, because Cisco defends Odo but doesn't defend Nog. And the murder happens under a Ferengi-run holosuite. Quark owns the holosuite. So Odo is the truly unknown by Cisco, but known by everyone else from previous experience under the Cardassians. So yeah, I don't know whether when writing it, the writers had that level of nuance in mind.
Possibly
That is
not.
interesting that when Sisko comes to defend him, he's defending him as an unknown, whereas to everyone else, he's just that shape-shifting wanker that's been in charge of us for so long.
And Odo calls him out. He specifically says, "You don't know me. You don't know that you can rely on me. So save your Federation flattery and diplomacy. It means nothing to me." Which I think is a wonderful swipe at some of the core concepts of Star Trek. That we can trust Picard as a diplomat. He espouses the finest ideals of the Federation: democracy, respect for man, and all these concepts which sound wonderful in practice, but in reality, in this kind of murky, unclear situation, what does that actually account for?
Yeah, and again, we come back to not knowing, as someone who hasn't seen any more of Odo's story yet, I don't know what he stands for. He stands for justice, but I've no idea what that justice looks like when he's not willing to take it from the people above him.
And why would you? He's been in a situation where he's just said to Sisko, "But justice is justice. There are Cardassian laws, there are Federation laws, but justice is justice." He's literally saying, "I will follow my own path. Not your Federation law, not your Cardassian law. I will follow my definition of justice," which I think is an incredibly provocative statement. It is.
Sorry, I'm just noting that we'd discussed earlier how it will take around 7 years for us to get
right. And the theory from the from the Indoor Cat is 14 years because we're doing it bi-weekly. Every 2 weeks. So it might be 14 years. I don't know.
Cat brings up a good point, though. I don't currently have a retirement plan. How much money can we make by spouting terrible opinions about Deep Space Nine?
If you're enjoying this podcast, please tell your friends. Tell them to subscribe to the Blogging Goth. Tell them to subscribe to the Blogging Goth on YouTube. We might have to find our own channel. I only used my personal Twitch because I had a little bit of an audience and I wanted to launch us straight onto people. But if we make any money off of this at all, we will pad out our retirement package.
I'm spending. If I made any money off this, I'd spend it all on Q action figures. Don't give me any money, guys.
And for the benefit of our new viewers as well, Kat is well aware that there is not a lot of Q in DS9. We've already discussed a Voyager rewatch, but that will commit us to possibly a couple of decades of talk. So let's not go down that path. We have officially passed the 1 hour mark as well. So I'm going to try and kick us along. Yes, there is Garak. Thank you, the Indoor Cat. Oh, please, we've got to get through this episode. We mentioned earlier Quark overhearing the conversation in the bar about Odo, and what a wonderful, in that tiny 30-second sequence, Odo is not a Cardassian collaborator. You've advanced your worries that Odo worked for the previous government. Quark, his enemy, is making it state that Odo is not a Cardassian collaborator, and that will come into play later, but we will find out that no, Odo, in fact, earned his position, and this is no spoiler, earned his position because he is not an enforcer of the government's rules. And that ties into what he said earlier about, I honour justice, not the rules of the government. And that he is no killer. Odo is no killer. So I do love that little sequence, and I hope you got. I mean, you said previously in the episode that you love that little relationship where this person is supposedly the enemy of the main character, and yet they come out to bat for them.
I really enjoy it, and I think it resists obvious things. It's never. One reason that Quark might want Odo to stay is because Odo lets him get away with things. That is clearly not the case. For some reason, Quark is fond of, wants this guy to stay, despite Odo being a complete pain in his ass. I don't think it is just the devil, There is something between the two characters that hasn't been fully defined yet. And I like that. It feels like there's something waiting to be revealed.
I would absolutely agree. And once again, it's no spoiler, but yes. Yes, 100% to go. 100%. I do love that little scene, though, and you're absolutely right. That relationship is yet to develop. I found it very a little bit ham-fisted and broad strokes that the music swelled as we panned the camera across from that little conversation to the only person wearing a hood in the entire bar.
Notice this face.
Oh wow! Look, the ominous figure at the bar might be important later. And I'm like, guys, come on. We are complex viewers of television. You do not.
I love that the guy who's in hiding has a perfect prosthetic. He's literally being played by a different actor at this point, and he's still wearing a hood. None of the other Bajorans are wearing hoods. He's just doing it to look shady. But it is part of the grammar of television. It's how do we make this character stand out? How do we make people notice so that when he turns up later, it isn't a surprise. It hasn't come out of nowhere. And it is elegant in that he does stand out in the way they need him to.
Absolutely. I like it. I guess yeah, you're absolutely right. It's kind of TV shorthand that I think some producers would ask for, It's Chekhov's supporting character, if you will.
Chekhov's hooded guy.
Chekhov's hooded guy. Again, a band I would love to go and see. I think that would be a fantastic gig. Excuse me. I'm going to push us on. After that conversation at the bar, obviously, a delegation comes up to Ops to confront Cisco and say, we were very worried about Odo. And I love that Kira immediately goes to bat for him. Kira being obviously the person we trust the most to know what's going on the station. And she's like, and I think this is the second time in the episode she said, Odo is an honorable man. And it's that code of honor. He has his own code of honor. It's not Federation law. It's not Cardassian law. He has a code of honor, and I believe that he is inflexible in it, which we will learn is true. I do love that scene, that Kira will come out to bat for him. And I would just say that you've said previously that, Odo was security under the Cardassian rule. If Kira comes out to bat for him...
Yeah, absolutely. She trusts him implicitly, and it's been clear since the first episode that they are close. So again, I think because it isn't obvious, it isn't black and white, it isn't completely clear exactly what Odo is, who he is, what he believes in. We're getting hints. We know he likes justice. We know that he's worked under different governments. We know that he's grumpy. But he doesn't feel like he fits in a very tidy box. I can't just square him away and say, oh yeah, that's what that guy's about.
And you're not.
And I like that.
Exactly. You are not meant to. You are not meant to win any of these characters. What I love about DS9 is that none of these characters will be anything like they are now in 7 or 14 years' time, whenever we get to it, which is a testament to the good writing on the show, the good acting on the show, and I'm so excited for you to see it all. I'm going to gloss very quickly over Quark and Odo when Odo finds his office has been vandalized, which I found very, very painful. It feels like Odo's sanctum, and to see it vandalized in a very kind of broad, as you pointed out, shifter on the wall is very kind of racist coded. I found that
by the end of the episode, no one has been punished for that. The words that Cisco used, just that the what was it? Sort of like the mob just went back about their business.
And
these are people with names and faces and addresses. You looked them in the eye as you were talking to them. Why has there been no justice dealt out to these people who commit? I mean, if we want to get petty, they committed vandalism. If we want to be real about it, they were a racist mob threatening to kill a man.
There was a scuffle. I think the only way I quantify it in my mind is, does that not seem weirdly believable? Does that not seem like something that would not be unbelievable today in 2023?
It's very true. I'm cynically feeling that had justice been done, Odo might have less to fear in the future. Whereas as it is, his position remains difficult, remains in danger aboard the ship because the people are still out there.
This is not the last time we'll go down this path. That's no spoiler at all. But this, once again, in a way that contrasts with the Next Generation, this storyline is not over. In a painfully relevant way, there are people who have gone out there and incited violence, formed a mob, tried to enforce the worst kind of justice of mob rule, and then just gone back to their lives and pretended it's not happened. Cisco says in that wonderfully Star Trekian speech, you will find no justice here. You will regret this in an hour's time. They may regret it, but they never face any consequence for it, and I'm afraid that remains painfully relevant 30 years
You're right.
after.
Yeah, you're right. I'm thinking about it in terms of the nuts and bolts of a TV show. But yeah, it does feel more realistic that justice isn't brought to them, because it rarely is. And yeah, it is extremely different from TNG, where by the end of the episode, they would all have learned the error, either learned the error of their ways or be in a penal colony where we expect them to. Whereas here, yeah, they remain at large. No one is completely safe. Nothing is perfectly secure yet, even though things are up and running aboard the station. The tension, the tension is always there. They never fully resolve it.
And they won't, because there are no easy solutions in DS9.
14 years.
No, stop saying it, it's scaring me. But there are no easy solutions, and I love that DS9 takes that on. I will then push us towards the conclusion. The concluding sections, which is Bashir getting his wonderful Treknobabble moment, which is, my God, I've got it. And then he says something completely incomprehensible and rushes out to the mob whilst, Sisko's delivered his wonderful concluding speech. And Bashir rushes out and says, Ibadan was not murdered. And this is after, the Star Trek scuffle, which, can I just point out, I love the little scuffle where Kira just duffs a guy and throws him over her shoulder. I love that. We keep forgetting that Kira is a very dangerous woman, and I kind of love that scene. But it ends in a wonderful Star Trek way, which is the Deus Ex Machina. Bashir has grown, I'm afraid, yes, we mentioned it at the very top of this episode, but this Cronenbergian, thank you, Kat, for mentioning Cronenberg, this god-awful bio-horror in a jar in his lab, and it turns
until
out...
it takes form, it's just this giant lump of
God,
flesh.
it makes my skin crawl. I've seen it 100 times. I saw it the first time it came out many years ago, and I've seen it again today, and it never fails to make me shudder. This god-awful, fleshy lump in a massive petri dish.
And I think it's a great special effect. It looks like what it's meant to look like. It's organic and it's ambiguous.
Believable.
We're not meant to know yet whether it's a human, whether it's human shaped, whether it's something else. So it looks right, but it looks horrible.
It looks horrible, absolutely horrible.
And I think I don't think they ever show us the full form of the Garak clone, or do they in the scene where they go back to the lab?
Ibadan clone.
Yeah, sorry, the Ibadan clone. Yes.
No, they don't. They get as far as I think it being, humanoid-esque, arms, legs, torso, head, but not a fully formed creature.
Just so that we hopefully won't think about what's going to happen to him after the end of the episode.
Which I think should be our...
Bashir goes full Dr. Frankenstein while solving this case and nothing's made of it. What the heck?
I want that to be our concluding thoughts. So we've realised that Ibadan murdered his clone. As you said in your summary, the Ibadan in the holosuite was a clone, and the real Ibadan murdered the clone to frame Odo, because Ibadan resents Odo for sending him to prison. So there is that wonderful sequence on the spaceship where the old hooded man turns out to be Ibadan. Or reality, 2 actors, and one of them has a latex mask, so Odo can turn from a chair into a person and then do a Scooby-Doo and pull off this guy's mask. What do you know? It was old man Ibadan after all. And he would have got away with it.
And the speed at which Odo has to speak, just to get all of the information out about how you were aboard a prison ship, you were in prison with this guy that Quarkus got knew about slightly early. He was a scientist, he learned how to do cloning, so you've been aboard the ship, and he has to speak really quickly to get all the information out, because there's literally 2 minutes in the episode left. But it's elegantly done. It does the job. And, and then they have the commander's log at the end just to tie off all the loose ends.
And this is it, right? Okay, there we go. So we found out who the killer was. Ibadan goes to prison because murder of your clone is still murder. Very true. What the episode fails to address, and what Kat so accurately addresses, is, well, what the hell does that make a clone? If murder of a clone is murder, then that person is a sovereign sapient being.
He's a Bajoran citizen in theory, but does he know how Bajoran society works? Does he have all of Ibadan's memories? In which case, does he have Ibadan's personality and hatred of Odo? If he doesn't, who's going to teach him how to be Bajoran? You can't just let him off into the world on his own. He's just been born.
You cannot. And yeah, it's all tied up, I think, in Bashir has his line, just, a fully functioning member of Bajoran society. And I'm like, wow, that is
He
the
looked so
quickest.
happy with himself in that moment.
Who the hell would be
Unearned,
that?
Bashir.
Incomprehensible. That is the fastest shorthand resolution of a character I've ever seen. It's woefully clumsy. I mean, woefully.
I mean, the only options were let him live or murder him again.
Oh my god! And that's why I think the writers went, we're running out of time. Let's just.
He's going to be happy. It's fine.
That's fine. That's
Just
fine.
sending him
Send
off
him
to a
out.
field where he
It'll
can
be
gamble
fine.
with all the other clones.
Wrap it up somewhere. An executive producer said, we're running out of time. You know, you've had some wonderful discussions about racism and lynch mobs and gender and you know, passing
And the
on
need for
lives.
education.
We can't get into clone, you know, sovereign rights right now. So just say, yeah, they're fine, and gloss the hell over it. And okay, that was bad. A poor show on this episode, but thankfully a limited one.
For an episode that addressed so many different points,
Right?
it did so many. It managed so many of them so elegantly.
I agree.
Apart from the clone.
Apart from the clone, which you would say is kind of an integral part of this episode, but it's
Just a little matter of creating life.
It's so bad. But that's fine. Okay, it's season 1 of a Star Trek show, which we've all said is always clumsy. And yes, the indoor cat points out that clones, as a general rule, kind of get used as a very throwaway plot element in Star Trek, and aren't treated very well, even when we argue so much about the rights of other species who are artificially created, like androids and holograms.
Yes.
We're weirdly not good on clones. But we are a little bit over our runtime, so I'm going to move us to the closing scenes of this episode, which is wonderfully the conclusion of the B plot, which is that Keiko O'Brien's school has attendees. And I love that actually they end on the B plot, because again, it ties into what we've said all the way through, I think, this podcast and this episode, which is that the natural organic running of the station and the integration of two cultures and just the operating normalities, no weird clones or murder, but just how do we keep our kids off the streets and out of trouble, is actually how we conclude this episode. And
that's the bit that's going to be carried over into the future. We don't need to be bearing in mind what the heck's happening with the clone. I think they wanted us to forget about that bit. We won't forget. Never forget Ibadan's
never
clone.
forget the clone.
But we now know that there's a school running and that it's a new deal, and that next time it turns up, something might be going on with that, because it's an entirely new concept. Ooh.
Did you perhaps write for Deep Space Nine once upon a time? Because oh my god, this school is going to become a pivotal plotline point in the future, and it will be so interesting to get to grips with you. But you liked the school.
I do like the school. I love the idea of the kids. I like the idea of the kids having more of a place in it, having storylines other than, oh no, some of the officers have now become kids as well.
Oh my god. Rascals. TNT Rascals.
It'll be nice for the kids, because I think Jake, he is a character already. He's a character with agency. He can say what he wants. He can express disgruntlement with being stuck on a space station. And I like the idea that the child characters are going to be taken seriously as people. Because I think often in TV shows, they can just brushed aside as adjuncts to their parents.
No, absolutely. I am pleased that DS9 will give the young cast agency in a way that I think, Star Trek has fumbled a bit previously, definitely on TNG. No, there will be agency for the school and agency for the young characters. I am pleased to say that is all to come. So I am pushing us towards the end, but those are the end of my notes. Is there anything in your notes we have not covered, Kat?
There was only one very minor and technical point about the opening of the episode when we said that Jedzu is in the holosuite engaging with a puzzle exercise.
Yeah.
And the puzzle is to try and cause her brain to emit theta waves, which will cause this colourful sphere to turn up in just one colour. And I just found it interesting because I'm going to actually look at what the name of it was. I've got it in my notes. There is an institute in America which has a machine that does something not entirely different from that. That's the lowlights. That's the racism.
A lot of notes on that. And keep them. You know what? Keep them.
Thank you. I will. I'm going to keep these notes so that I can look at what I've achieved over my life. The Peak Brain Institute in Los Angeles, there's a form of treatment which involves having a machine monitor your brain waves while you watch a screen on which a CGI spaceship is traveling forward, but it only moves forward when your alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and theta brainwaves are balanced in a way that neurologists deem to be optimal, healthy. If you're distracted, if you're anxious, if you're daydreaming, you're sleepy, your brainwave emissions alter. And when that happens, the machine picks up on it, the spaceship stops moving, and it only starts again when the brainwaves are within the range that's considered healthy.
God.
And patients practice doing this as a form of neural feedback. So by knowing what state, gradually learning what state they're in when the spaceship is moving,
Yeah.
they can learn to replicate that. It's like a form of meditation, like what Dax is doing.
Which is exactly what Dax is doing. Vivek in the chat, do you know what the machine is called?
I cannot remember the name of the damn machine. I'm going to very quickly have a look.
I mean, what you can do is you can look it up, and we will add it to our notes when I publish this on YouTube, so interested parties can go and do further research. But I think any Star Trek podcast would be enriched by highlighting all of the things that Star Trek hypothesizes that then become real tech. Because that is incredible. But
yeah, I thought it was just nice. I think it showed an extent to which the writers did have some either the writers or their scientific consultants had a good enough understanding of technology to know what might be possible. Because I'm aware that in some of the TNG scripts, there's space for science jargon.
Well, we mentioned that I think in our first episode with the very free use of subspace, which obviously has many complex
connotations.
Thank you. So yes, I would encourage any of my.
That's a really good point, though. They haven't relied on subspace for a plot device since the first episode. Complex this Star Trek stuff.
Give them time. Oh my God! As you correctly observed in the early viewings, subspace is Star Trek's version of quantum as a lazy scientific get out. Subspace is where all of the strange things happen that justify science fiction in Star Trek. So it's not the last we've heard of it, I'm afraid to say. I think then that brings us to the slightly uneven end of A Man Alone. I guess just closing thoughts, Kat. Did you enjoy this episode?
I did. It was an engaging episode. As I say, there was a lot going on, a lot of different interactions between characters, all of which I really enjoyed. And yeah, I'm looking forward to watching more.
Wonderful. Me too. I also find it very good at establishing characters like Dax, Odo, Bashir, Cisco, Quark. There are the foundations of relationships which will change, and as the show develops, slightly alter this. I refer back to what I said earlier in the episode, which was that this is early installment weirdness. The writers are still feeling out these characters. So there will be developments in the future of DS9 which slightly subvert and counter and contradict what we've discussed. But the foundations are here. These are starting to become the characters we are going to come and live with for the next however long we are here.
The rest of our lives, Tim.
Oh my God, say it's not true. We aren't getting paid for this. So I'm going to thank very much my co-presenter Kat for their input to this episode. I'm going to quickly look up our next episode so that our lovely viewers, thank you everyone in chat who's joined
And
us.
thank you to our mod, the Indoor Cat.
Thank you so much. I'm going to say that the next episode is Babel. Which,
promising name.
Yeah. Google dictates it's episode 4, but I don't think it is. I think it's technically episode 5 of Deep Space Nine Season 1. So I would like to thank all of our viewers and encourage them to watch episode 4 or 5, Babel, of Season 1 of DS9.
Yes, they're in the wrong order on Netflix, but if you start by watching Babel, they'll think they'll be in the right order from here on in. Maybe. Hopefully. I'm just going to have to trust you, Tim, each week. Tell us what to watch.
Oh, good Lord. Wish us luck, everyone. So, thank you very much, Kat. Once again, you have been a wonderful co-presenter. Thank you to our chatters and the Indoor Cat for being our backroom staff. Thank you. And we will.
And thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much. And we will see everyone again in a couple of weeks' time to discuss Babel. Okay.
See you then.
Good night. Take care.